It's different when we're talking about like, credit card debt. And if you don't pay it off, it's going to be, whatever, 15 or 25 or whatever percent, like crazy. So owners that have extra money that they don't want to be taxed on, they're like, hey, we might as well like.
Let's go into our world and let's talk about valuations, how a small provider like me would look at building a business that has a exit potential, maybe an acquisition from somebody like you, maybe an acquisition from somebody else. What kind of stuff can we share with the people watching to help them build a business that has long-term value?
Absolutely. So we're looking for partnerships and acquisitions. So we're on the buy side, and any owners watching or listening, like they're most likely going to be, or more likely to be on the sell side, like looking to actually sell their practice, their business. There's a lot of common frustrations on both sides. I don't want to say that it's all you guys, that it's all the owner side. There's certain things, like, for example, I can give like anonymous examples of like where we like the deal kind of dragged on, the due diligence dragged on for a lot of extra time, a lot of extra weeks or months, and then we decide, like, something happens and it's like we have to walk away or whatever. And there's been a ton of examples like that I can't really share about the whole practice.
Let's just make something up, because I know I've been there. Like, I've been on the trying to sell side, and we get down this road and then my numbers don't add up and I don't have good accounting in place, and it just pushes it further and further down the road. And eventually we're like, look, we just can't do it. I've publicly shared that there have been multiple times where I tried to sell the practice, sell a unit within the practice, and I just can't do it because I can't show the financials to the bank so the buyer can get funding. I can't show the tax returns in a way that makes the business look valuable. And we just end up wasting everybody's time. And of course, with that, everybody's money. And if you're bringing attorneys in, accountants in, that all costs money. So just make something up. It's not based on it is based on experience, but it's not somebody's actual situation.
I have a great example that is from an experience that we had, but I'm going to kind of, change the numbers a bit and talk about it so high level that even if that owner were to listen, they're not going to know that we're talking about them. So let's say there's a physical therapy practice that's doing somewhere around $1 million in revenue. And we sign an NDA, we kind of look at their financials. They may or may not have a broker. The broker may or may not have constructed this confidential information memorandum, a SIM, a CIM, a SIM. So we're looking at the financials, and let's say the adjusted EBITDA. So basically it's like whatever the owner is, whatever like the net income is after expenses. And then this would be adding back in, like we've talked about it before, like if you're buying some products for the clinic, some products for your home, like cleaning supplies or whatever, all those add backs, anything that's personal items that is not business critical, that all gets added back. So anyway, regardless, about $1 million in revenue. And let's say the adjusted EBITDA, so like the net income after those add backs are put back in, let's say it's around $200,000. So we're looking at a practice and it's got a whole bunch of other components and we can maybe get into like other components that would kind of swing the valuation like one way or the other. So this particular anonymous example, we're talking to the owner and we're like, based off of XYZ, and we can get into some of the things in a minute, but based off of what we're seeing, we would offer a 3x multiple for this practice, right? So again, you take the $200,000 adjusted EBITDA number times 3, so $600,000. So that's like a verbal offer, depending on how the conversation goes, depending on the relationship, depending on if it's multiple conversations. Obviously, this is after we sign an NDA, speak to the broker, speak to the practice owner, all that. So, Mr. and Mrs. Practice Owner, based off of this, which we're going to get into in a minute, your adjusted EBITDA is $200,000. Before we even say a verbal offer, though, Tony, we would make sure, like, okay, so you agree, like, because of all these other things, like, this is your number you're coming to us with? And then we have to get agreement on the 200,000 adjusted EBITDA first. So I kind of glossed over that. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me ask you about that. What are some of the influencing factors that you're looking at to say, okay, a 3-time multiple, 5-time multiple, 1-time multiple?
So I can pull it up, but there's like an approximate for physical therapy businesses, but really just for service-based businesses. So it could be HVAC, plumbing, landscaping, physical therapy, chiropractic, I don't know, acupuncture, massage. I think those probably sell less often, but any like service-based business that you see in a lot of, strip malls, like there's kind of like an approximate chart. Like basically like the higher the adjusted EBITDA number is, then the more like the higher of the multiple number. So we would take the adjusted EBITDA number. And if you're doing like $1 million in adjusted EBITDA, so that means you're probably doing like 4 or 5 million in revenue. That 1 million of adjusted EBITDA, basically net income after the ad backs are put back in, that's that $1 million of adjusted EBITDA. Again, typically it's obviously a bigger practice. They have multiple locations probably. They can warrant or they can demand a higher multiple. They can demand a higher valuation compared to a practice that's doing 100 or 150 or $200,000 in adjusted EBITDA. So there's kind of like an ascending scale that you get a higher number multiple based off of the size of your adjusted EBITDA. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm going to say, why is that? I've got ideas about why that would be, but why would it make a difference if we're talking absolute dollars? Why would $100 versus $1 million make a difference on a multiple?
One of the things is the more net income, net profits, adjusted EBITDA is the fancy word. The more net income that's in the business, the less risky it is. That's one of the biggest components. Like there's more scale. So if a buyer comes in and they shake the tree and they cause waves or whatever, some people might leave at the $1 million EBITDA practice, and then some people might also leave from the $200,000 EBITDA practice. Well, that's a smaller team size. So if some people leave, that's like a critical number of people that leave. If I'm going to partner or buy a practice, I want smooth sailing through the transition to go from the current owner to us being majority owners, whether we're buying 51% or if we're buying 70 or 80 or maybe even 100% of the equity of the practice. So we want a smooth transition. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to scare employees. We don't want the employees to then say, oh, there's this new owner. I'm going to start putting my resume out everywhere else. I'm going to look for a job somewhere else, because we want those team members, assuming that they're good or great, we want those team members to stay with the transition for smooth sailing, because even the bigger practices like USPH, they all raise debt. Like USPH is public. They take out hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. And oftentimes we might as well, meaning we plan to, yes, we're going to take some money out of our pockets, out of our bank accounts, some of the equity. Yes, of course. But all that kind of factors in. So regardless, those are some of the components of it.
And I would think that just, it has to be worth your while. Like back to when I'm looking at a potential business opportunity, it's like, what is the max return I'm going to get? What is the expected return I'm going to get? I'm not going to do something that's going to put $20 in my bank account, because it's not worth the time or the effort, because it's just as much work to go into something that's going to put $2 million in my bank account. So I've got to think that that's an element in this. But okay, so we've got that. We're looking at the story where we agree 200,000 in EBITDA, 3 times multiple. Where does that go from there?
I'm glad you asked. So we've had many of these over the past year or two. So we would, and again, so whether it's Chad Madden's podcast, because he sold his 6 or 5 or 6 locations to USPH. He talked about selling out to USPH on his podcast. He talked about multiples. He also mentioned this approximate chart of like $300,000 or less of net income, or the adjusted EBITDA number. Typically, you're kind of in the range of a 3x multiple. So you take 300 times 3. So it would be a valuation of 900,000, even though you're doing, $1 million or 1.5 or 2 million in revenue. So you got 300,000 or less in net income. You got a 3x multiple, approximately $400,000 in net income. You might be able to demand a 4x multiple. Then if you're kind of in the $500,000 to $800,000 range of adjusted EBITDA, you potentially could kind of demand, or again, depending on other factors, which we'll get into, you can kind of command or demand a 5 or 6 or maybe even a 7x EBITDA multiple. And then if you're like over $1 million in net income or the adjusted EBITDA number, you could be in the 7, 8, X EBITDA multiple. So you take that number times the multiple number. And each time the number goes from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 or 8, that's called a turn, one turn of the multiple. So, and each of those numbers is, like you said about return on investment. Each time the number goes from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5, that's going to be like, it's going to take another year for us to just make our money back on the investment. And that's why I was saying, like, we might use, we plan to use the SBA loans or commercial debt or whatever, just like the big guys are using debt. And each of the multiple numbers is going to take an extra turn, like an extra annual year. If the business stays the same, it's going to take another year. So from 3 to 4, it's going to take from the third year to the fourth year in the future to just make our money back on the money that we deployed to buy that practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we talk about debt for just a second? I don't want to interrupt the story, but sure. How do you look at debt? Because I know debt's a big, thing. You've got, I can't think of Dave Ramsey, the financial guy, talking about debt from one perspective. You've got other business owners talking about debt from a different perspective. I'm trying to teach my kids, you're eventually going to do the same. But it's like, look, debt is not a bad thing. Debt is fertilizer. Debt is how you grow the garden. Debt is, when used correctly, debt is something that we need to escalate and buy back time. How do you look at debt, taking on debt, balancing risk of that debt with the ability to grow any business, not even just a physical therapy business?
Yeah, it's a financial lever that is used. I'm looking where you're at right now, right? So, like, let's say you were like in this room that you're in. So, like, you might have used debt to have like a construction loan, right? For the new cabinets, the new lighting, the new crown molding, paint, flooring, carpet, whatever it is, or building out more of the physical therapy practice. Maybe you're going to revamp the front desk, whatever it is, signage inside, signage outside, whatever, right? So there's the construction part of it. Then there's also, like, we've spoken to some practices where they're like on the cusp of opening up another location. So their net income is going to look less. So then we have to take that into consideration. So debt is like you said, oftentimes a good thing. It's different when we're talking about, like, credit card debt. And if you don't pay it off, it's going to be, whatever, 15 or 25 or whatever percent, like crazy. So owners that have extra money that they don't want to be taxed on, they're like, hey, we might as well, like, buy another location, or we can open up another location, or we're going to make capital improvements to the office if they're renting and they have approval from their landlord, or in your case, you are the landlord, Tony. So you just talk to yourself. You look one way, you look the other. Can I do this? Yes, we can do this. Okay, we have the money to cover it. Okay, talk to the landlord. We're approved. So that's a good thing. And you, instead of being taxed on it, you could say, hey, let's invest in one of those ways, and then we'll make it back in whatever time based on your projections. So that's a good thing. However, it will have to come off of the purchase price, right? So, like, if they have we've looked at practices where they have an extra $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 of debt from a recent construction, or improving the practice. That's like, if we're going to offer $1 million, but there's $200,000 in debt, like, then the debt we're going to either have resolved, or we're going to absorb the debt. Like, we're going to take on the debt, but then the seller is going to get $800,000. Yeah. Like, if we're saying the practice is worth $1 million right now today, or this quarter or whatever, but you have $200,000 in debt from last year or 2 years ago doing, refurbishment and construction. Like, if we believe the practice is worth $1 million, we're gonna say, okay, it's $1 million, and we're gonna absorb the debt. So now we're gonna pay you $800,000. We're not gonna pay you 1.2.
Right.
All right. Well, let's see what Scott said. Go ahead, if you want to read it out.
Scott's saying, for smaller practices under $1 million in revenue, wouldn't it be more appropriate to look at SDI, which I don't know what SDI is, versus EBITDA?
Yeah. So sellers discretionary income, or I've seen it as SDE, sellers discretionary earnings. It's kind of, yes, Scott, it's kind of in the whole conversation. I know they're not exactly the same, but they're kind of close enough. We just happen to use EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA for multiple reasons. One, I think, is the brokers, and it should not all be dictated by the brokers. It should kind of be dictated by the buyers, like whoever is going to be buying. But even like all the regional and larger buyers of physical therapy businesses across the country, they're using EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA. So we're just trying to all use like the same, language and the same ruler, like the same measurement tools, basically, to evaluate different practices. If it's under $1 million in revenue, the SDI or the SDE versus EBITDA, I mean, it's going to be pretty much in the same range, and we're using it for some of those reasons. And it's not just all me. Like, I have a forensic accountant that's on my team, so like he helps considerably with looking at the financials and due diligence, and he has a really great grasp of EBITDA. And we know, for Scott, with these practices that are doing, I think he said, under $1 million in revenue, typically they're going to be around 200,000 to 250,000 of adjusted EBITDA. We got to dig into the books. We got to get all our financials. We're going to say, hey, Tony, or we're going to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Practice Owner, we're not going to report you to the IRS. We know you're showing like basically no net income. We know that when you go to Costco and BJ's and all that, and you're buying like bulk cleaning supplies and toilet paper and paper towels, we know, come on, let's be honest. We know half of it is for the clinic and half of it is for your home, but then you're using 100% of it as a business write-off, saying that it's all used in your business. Every practice owner, any IRS agents watching, just tune off, just log off right now. Get off the show, because we know most practice owners across the country are all doing this. And then, there's practice owners that are in this range, Scott, that are under $1 million in revenue, and they have all their families' gym memberships on the books, their cell phone bills, their Costco and BJ's memberships, and everything, and sometimes either mortgages or even like their vehicles, right? And it's like multiple vehicles, and it's like you're the only one driving to the outpatient office, and that's not really critical. So they get credit for those items, because if we were to buy the practice tomorrow or in a month or whatever, we're looking at the next year. Okay, in the next year, this individual's, this car, this membership, this, and sometimes it results in thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars in difference. So we say in the future, these items are not going to be on the business books. So that actually hits the bottom line. This is free cash flow. The seller gets credit for that. So Scott, long-winded answer. That's kind of why we are using EBITDA for multiple reasons, but you pose a good argument for sure.
And to Scott's point, I think, under that valuation, you're not going to get a big buyer anyway. Like USPH is not going to come in and buy a practice that's under $1 million anyway. It's going to be a private deal. It's going to be somebody who probably has been working for you. It's going to be somebody who knows you or is connected to you in some way. And you're just going to be like, look, I mean, that's what we did. We were a small single location that we were selling off. We weren't going back to Florida anymore. And we're like, hey, you guys have been here a decade. You know the place. You know the referrals. You have everything. This is what the numbers are showing. If I, didn't sell to you, this is my net profit over the next 3 years. Here's the deal. This is what we're going to do. And it was just an agreement. There was nothing complicated going on there. So I would say under $1 million, you're probably just going to be in a private deal anyway. It's going to be an easy one. So what, go ahead.
Sidebar that's related to this. So another reason why this whole process can be frustrating, challenging for both sides. Tony, so you're in Ohio. You drive around. You guys know a ton of families, a ton of folks. You've been in the community for a long time. There's way more comps. There's way more comparables on houses being sold, right? I bet if I came to visit you, Tony, we drove around, I'm sure you could be like, oh, the Johnsons live there. It's probably worth this much money, or it was sold for this much, or a realtor has a big mouth and they're telling everyone like this, your house is probably worth this because I sold, 2 doors down last year and it was this dollar amount. That's another reason why like businesses don't change hands as much as houses. And for like businesses, it's a little more private. It's your livelihood. It's your baby. Your home is also very private, but for those reasons, and maybe you can fill in some gaps, but the comps of houses being sold in any rural area, any town, any metro, anywhere, it's just more readily available versus businesses. They're sold less often. They have probably a wider sliding scale of valuation, like higher and lower, and homes are like kind of like, triangulated closer to probably where they should be in like any state. So does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
there's no comps that are, other than when you speak to a broker, there's no comps unless Tony, you're like, oh, I knew another PT practice owner in Ohio that had a similar size and revenue. He showed me his numbers because I had known him for 20 years. Here's how much he got. Here's the patient, volume that he saw. Here's the revenue. Here's the adjusted EBITDA. Here's the number that he got. And I'm his same size. I want that number, or I'm better than him because I have all this media and these technologies and treatment techniques and all that. So maybe you can command more. But for most people, they have no comp. They have no understanding. So then they're like, oh, I'm being ripped off. I'm being lowballed by Dave Kittle, or I'm being lowballed by USPH or Confluent or any other big buyer out there. Does any of that make sense?
Totally. And in a minute, whenever you're ready, I'll pull up the Biz Buy Sell website. We'll look at the best available information we have. But you're right. Like in any city, I can go to the tax collector website. I can pull up any home valuation. I can see what, the county records show. I can see what it's sold for. And then you look at companies like, what's the big website for house valuation? Zillow. So like Zillow came out and made all this stuff even more public. It was public before, but now it's even more public. I wonder if there's an opportunity there for a true marketplace that looks at and disseminates this information a little more readily. And I wonder if, back to, we're small business owners. We didn't train as business owners. We trained as therapists coming into business. But it's like now in 20, years of private practice, if I did it again, if I did it today for the first time, I would start a brand new business with a brand new tax ID with the intent to sell. And I would build that business with the sole intent to sell. Even though back in the day when I started in 2001, 2002, I was like, oh, it'd be nice to sell. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to show valuations, how to show profitability, how to do any of that stuff. But it's like, if we did it again, I would build something to sell, and it would be a very different business model than what I did back in 2001 and 2002.
Yeah, awesome. Makes sense.
So whenever you're ready, let's go into the Biz Buy Sell website. But before we do that, just one more kind of wrap it up. What are the main delays that happen that trigger, either a deal to die or a deal to take 12 months instead of 3 months? If I want to go buy a car, we're in the market. My 16-year-old's got his driver's license. We're looking at cars. I go online. I see what the prices are retail. I'm just going to go. I'm going to buy the car. It'll be done in a couple hours. But it's not like that for a business. So what are the main delays?
First one is how long it takes for us to get all the documents and the files. And we have to ask for information and data in waves, because if we ask for everything that we need, it's a huge tidal wave that feels beyond overwhelming and stressful for a practice owner. So it'll be like the first wave, Tony, is like, hey, let's sign this NDA. And then it's like, all right, we need the last 3 years of your tax returns and your financials, right? So like your P&L, your income statement, balance sheet, those financials for the last 3 years. That's like the first thing. Then the second thing is like clinical information, like some of the stuff, like some of the common, like the top, like Sturdy McKee talks about, like the top 7, like productivity, like visits per case, cost per visit, like those common clinical productivity type metrics. Just that, unfortunately, can take a long time. Just asking for 5 or 7 of those. We've had owners, they're like, here's the login to our EMR. Like, we already signed an NDA. Like, you go in and pull it out. And it's like, I mean, that's fine. It's faster that way, but it's like, oh man, like, and then it's like, we need the lease agreement. We need, if it's in network, we need every contract from all your in network contracts. And they're like, oh, like, I don't know where those are at. And it's like, I mean, this information is kind of important. Like, so if you're serious about selling, we need all of your, insurances, liability, like your payroll records, like, and asking for those waves of information, like the data requests, is the biggest thing that delays it. That's number one. Number two is once we get all this information, then we're trying to triangulate the valuation based off of what we're seeing. We're looking at everything. We're looking at Google reviews, Glassdoor reviews. We're looking at the team, like the team, how are they online? Like, do they have an online footprint in any way? Some of that can be signaling. We're just trying to look for signals. We're looking for smoke signals. We're looking for signals. We're looking for skeletons in the closet. Then we're trying to come up with like a number. And unfortunately, a lot of owners are like, well, I'm doing 1.2 million in revenue, so I want 1.2 as my purchase price. And it's like, no, I understand that the revenue number is the biggest glaring number. I get that. That's just not how businesses are valued or sold in this range, like under a couple $1 million, or like Scott said, like around $1 million or $2 million in revenue. Here's actually how they're valued. And sometimes the brokers help them and they're realistic, and sometimes the brokers are overreaching or they're trying to ask for a number that just financially doesn't make sense. So those are like the two big ones.
Yeah, and I've got to think having a reasonable broker on your side, like they're going to help you get through that process on the sell side. They're going to help you, know ahead of time what are buyers looking for, what's the best position for your business in the market. Are you going to try and sell to a buyer like you who might be looking at something as a hands-off investment? Or are they going to look at a buyer, a new therapist who wants to be a practice owner, who's going to be the treating therapist in the business? These are all very different kinds of approaches.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at CONCIERGE, painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.